Gittin Daf Daled. We begin with the two dots about 10 lines into the daf. We're going to get to the end of the second parak and begin the third parak. The third parak will introduce the topic of lishma more in a detail, what has to be lishma, what the psul of shma is involved in. From now till the end of the parak, we'll be discussing a woman who's bringing her own get as a shliach lehalacha, and the Gemara will try to explain how that exists. So the Gemara begins. We've seen in our mission that a woman can bring her own get, and she's a messenger of the husband to bring the get. The Gemara asks, how is that possible? As soon as she receives the get, she's divorced. There is no messengerness. She's not being a messenger of the husband. As soon as he gives her the get, she's divorced on the spot. So the Gemara says, it must be, the Gemara is going to try a few options here, and the Gemara is going to have a problem with each of them until we get to the end. So the Gemara says it must be that he gave her the get, and he said, you cannot be divorced with this get until you get to such and such place. Let's say he gave it to her in Israel and says, you're not going to be divorced until you get to the Beis of Spain. So she's a shliach to bring the get to there. So Gemara asks, she's not a shliach to bring the get to there. There's a condition on the get. The condition is that the get does not take effect until she gets there. However, once she gets there, it takes effect from the moment that he gave it to her. The moment of divorce is when he gives her the get. He just said it's suspended, taking effect until she travels to Spain. So this is not, she's not a shliach l'halacha there. So the Gemara gives another answer. Rav Huna bar Menayach says in the name of Rav Acha Breder Avika. He says to her, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take the get. When you get to Spain, you're not divorced with it. When you get to Spain, you're going to put it on the ground, and then you pick it up. That is where the get is going to be chal. So this is not a tanai in the get. He's saying that's going to be the maisa. That'll be the action. That'll be the actual action of divorce. So the Gemara says that this would solve the problem of her being a shliach. She really is a shliach there. She's a shliach to bring the get to that spot. The problem is that it doesn't work. If a man says to a woman, take your get off the floor, that's not a divorce. He has to give it, he has to place it in her hand. So the Gemara therefore goes to another pshat. The Gemara says, he says to her, be a shliach to bring it until you get there. When you get there, turn into a shliach for yourself to accept it, and accept the get yourself. So there, what's happening is not that it takes effect when she gets there, is he's telling her, you're a shliach to bring it there. That's it. When you get there, you can make yourself a shliach and take it from yourself. And therefore there is a shlichus here. So there's another problem here. There's a concept called chazur shlichus eitzel habal. In order for a messenger, for an agent to do his job properly, he has to be able to finish the job and be able to go back and say, I did the job. The function of an agent is that he's a go-between between two individuals. This woman is a go-between between her husband and herself, but she has to be able to be free to return to her husband and say, I did the job, before she can take on another job. If it's the way the entire thing is structured, that's not possible. That's an invalid shlichus. And that's why the Gemara is saying this cannot be what the case is. So the Gemara says, okay, I'll tell you a different shot. He says to her, bring shliach to bring it to Spain. When you get there, make someone else to be a shliach lekabbalah for you and give it to that person. So the Gemara says, okay, that would solve those problems. The problem is a woman allowed to make a shliach lekabbalah? That's a machlokes. There is an opinion that says a woman is not allowed to make a shliach lekabbalah, to be makabel the get from another shliach. Now, to be makabel the get from her husband, she for sure is. She can make an agent to accept the get from her husband. And to make a shliach to accept the get from a shliach, that's questionable. So according to the opinion, she's allowed to do that. This works. But according to the other opinion, it doesn't work. So the Gemara says no, it works even according to that opinion. And to explain why, you have to get into what is the reason, what is the issue with a woman making a shliach to represent her, to accept the get from the shliach of the husband. So there's two pshatim. One pshat is that it is denigrating to the husband that she doesn't accept it from him herself. She makes an agent to represent her. And therefore, not that we care about his honor, but he may care about his honor, and therefore he may have in mind that he's canceling the get if she does something like that. He would never agree to give the get, and therefore it's not valid. So we don't want to put her in a situation where it's not going to be valid. Now, if she makes a shliach to be makabel directly from him, the fact that he gives it to the shliach shows that he doesn't care. But in other circumstances, if she makes a shliach to be makabel from the shliach of the husband, then he may be able to say, had I known, I would never have agreed, and therefore it's never chal, and therefore we have a problem, and that's why she shouldn't be able to do it. So the Gemara says no, but over here that's not relevant because the husband's giving her the get, and he's telling her, when you get there, go make a shliach. So he obviously doesn't care, so that's not an issue. So the Gemara says this is all good according to the first reason why that is a problem. The problem is there's another reason, and there's another opinion as to what the reason is that a woman can't make a shliach halacha to accept a get. Why a woman cannot make a shliach l'kabbalah to accept a get from her husband's shliach l'halacha, and that is because it looks like chutzer that changes property with the get in it. We've seen before, if the husband puts the get in his friend's property, and then the friend gives that yard to the woman, she's not divorced with that because there was no divorce. The husband didn't give her the get, and the one who gave her the get is not her husband. So the divorce can't happen. So we have, if we'll do this shlichus thing, it will look kind of similar to that. The husband gives the get to someone, and then that person transfers it into the possession of someone who's representing her. It looks like the chatzar is a shliach of him, and then the chatzar becomes a shliach of her. It looks too similar. We're afraid if we allow this, people are going to allow that, and therefore we shouldn't allow this case either. It should be usher. So the Gemara says you're right, and therefore we have to look for another explanation as to what the husband says. So the Gemara says he says to her, "Be a shliach to bring it until you get to Spain. When you get to Spain, make a shliach to bring it further. Give it to another shliach l'halacha, and then you take the get from him. That way you solve all the problems." Another similar answer, the Gemara says that he says to her, "Be a shliach to bring it to the Beis Din in Spain. When you get to the Beis Din, don't receive it, give it to the Beis Din, and make the Beis Din mashlichim to make this divorce work. And then you'll say because you're mashliach, and the Beis Din will complete the operation. You'll accept it from them. They'll become a shliach from you, and you'll accept it, and it'll be fine." Okay, this concludes the second parak of the Masech. Now we begin the third parak Kol HaGet, which discusses the concept of a get being lishma. And the opening Mishnah brings increasing levels of stringency as to how lishma has to be. It says not only does it have to be lishma in this way, not only is this case not lishma, but even a more likely to be lishma case is also no good, and also no good, and also no good, and it keeps piling on, and the Gemara explain why we need them. So the Gemara's first case, the Gemara begins by saying any get which is written not for this specific woman is puzzle. Now we get to the cases. So if somebody is walking through the street and he hears scribes writing, and they're talking as they're writing, they're speaking out what they're writing, and they're saying this person is divorcing this woman, and it's in this place, and this person, and the walker, the passer by, is hearing this and says, "Hey, that matches me, my wife, and the place. So maybe I'll just say, can I use that get?" So he will not. Even if they give him the get, he's not allowed to. More than that, and the Gemara will explain what the more than that is, if it's even written for someone to actually divorce his wife, and he decides not to, and then he gives it to someone else and says, "Here, you use it to divorce your wife," because it matches, the names in the place match, there it is no good. It's not good as well, even though it was written actually to divorce. Even more than that, if somebody had two women with the same names, and he wrote it for one, he can't use it for the other wife. And even more than that, if he says to a scribe, "Write me a get for one of my wives, I didn't decide yet which one I want to divorce," then he says, "I'm going to decide later," even though you may say, well, with the time that he's writing for whichever one. He doesn't know which one it is, but he's writing for that one. We just don't know which one it is yet. The concept of Breira, the Mishnah says this is no good as well. This still does not work. Now begin the Gemara. The first thing the Gemara wants to know is what's the difference between the first case and the second case. First case, you heard a scribe writing a get, and he realized that the names match. And then the second case, someone had the get written for him, and the names match. Great. So in both cases, a get was written for someone else, and the names match. What's the difference? So the Gemara explains that the first case, the get wasn't written at all. It was a scribe teaching students how to write, and they weren't right. It was just writing for practice. It wasn't being written for anybody yet. It was never intended to be used. The second was an actual get that was meant to be used. Says Rav Ashi, you can see this in the Mishnah also, because it says that he heard the scribe reading it for others. This is makrin. The word makrin means reading it for others. So it was the head scribe who was teaching the others how to write, and that's what those words mean. Now, the Gemara wants to explain what is the additional level of chiddush in each of these cases. So the Gemara explains the first case, the get wasn't even written to be used as a divorce at all. So that's possible. The second case is even though it was meant to be used as a divorce, it's still no good. The third case is that even though it was meant to be used for him, it just wasn't for her. That's no good. How do you know that? By the way, the Gemara says the pasuk says if a chasav law. So the v'chasav is that he has to write it. It has to be written for him. That's what it teaches me, that it has to at least be l'shma for him. If it's for someone else, it's no good. And then it says law that says not only is enough, it's not enough to be just l'shma for him. It also has to be law for her. It has to be l'shma as well. Now, the last case, well, how is that a chiddush over the second case? The last case, the third case you had, it was for him, but it wasn't for the right wife. So the last case is the same thing. It was for him, but it wasn't, you don't know for which wife. So much the chiddush there is ein breira. You cannot say, write it for whichever one I'm going to just choose later, and you are writing it for the right one, you just don't know it. You're going to find out later who that is. That's a concept of breira, that you find out later which one you're referring to, and you were actually referring to that one all along. That concept does not work, at least not for Gittin, which is a din d'oraisa. The Gemara now begins a new sugya. This is the sugya of what happens if you have two people in one city with the same name. The Gemara refers to them as Yosef ben Shimon. Two Yosef ben Shimons in one city. What do you do as far as making sure that a document that you have refers to the Yosef ben Shimon that you're referring to and not the other one? So we have a Mishnah elsewhere which brings a machlokas as to whether that Yosef ben Shimon could come with a document that somebody owes him money. He's holding the document, and he comes to, let's say, Reuven, and says, you owe me $100, and here's the proof. And Reuven says, no, I didn't, it wasn't you, it was the other guy. It was the other Yosef ben Shimon, he must have lost the star, and you found it. So in that case, is machlok is whether that's a valid claim, or Yosef ben Shimon says, look, I'm holding it, the fact that I'm holding it and not him proves that it was to me, and there is no concern that he dropped it and I found it. I'm holding it. There's a machlokes. Now the other way, though, if Reuven comes to Yosef ben Shimon with a document and says, you owe me $100, it says right here on this piece of paper, everybody agrees Yosef ben Shimon could say, I don't know you anything. It was the other Yosef ben Shimon. And the fact that the document didn't specify means we can't know who it's referring to, and therefore it's useless. So the Gemara says, in our Mishnah, you have similar situations. And the Gemara begins with a diak, or a lima, that Rava makes from the Mishnah. It says if somebody has two wives with the same name, so he writes the get for one, he can't use it for the other. So Gemara says that implies that for the first one, he could use it. The one he wrote it for, he could use. Why don't you say that we're going to have a problem, and that maybe she's going to lose it, the other wife is going to find it, and then she's going to claim that she's divorced with it, and we won't know, and we'll assume that, and she'll use it to prove that she's divorced, even though she's not, because it wasn't written for her, it was written for the other one. But the fact that it's valid, though, proves that we don't have that concern. We don't have a concern that a shtar is going to be lost and found by somebody else with the same name. And therefore, that should be a proof to the opinion that Yosef ben Shimon, who comes with a shtar to say that Reuven owes him $100, there's no claim that you lost it, that someone else lost it and you found it. We see that we're not concerned that someone lost it and it was found by someone else with the same name. So that's what Rava wants to bring from this Mishnah. Abaye says, but hold on a second. So let's go to the case before this in our Mishnah, where we had somebody wants to use someone else's get. That is, a husband wrote for his wife, and they all happen to have the same name, and now somebody else comes and he says, can I use that? You decided you don't want to use it. Can I use it? So the Mishnah again says there that he can't. Now, that also implies that he can't, but the first person, if he does decide to use it, he could, even though it could potentially be our guy's. And it's the same name. He has the same name. The wife has the same name. So the question there is, how could he be allowed to use it? Everyone agrees in the case of Yosef ben Shimon that he can't, that Reuven can't come to him with a shtar and say, you owe me. So how in this case could this get work? We should have the same issue. How do we know that it was written for this wife? Maybe it was written for a different wife, and therefore how is he allowed to come and use it? Just like Reuven can't use it against Yosef ben Shimon, the husband can't use it against the wife. The only solution to this is to say that we are relying on Edim Mesira, and this is Rav Elazar's opinion. The get itself doesn't stand alone without verbal testimony. Signatures are worthless. You need to have someone who saw it being used properly. And that's the reason why it's not comparable to that case. Because here the husband and the wife, there are Edim that saw that it was written for them and it was done correctly. Now, if that's the case, so then in your proof is also not a proof. The fact that he could use it for his other wife is not an issue. We're not afraid that the other wife is going to find it and get divorced with it, because you have to have Edim Mesira, or in Rav Elazar's opinion. The Gemara now begins another sugya, and that's all these get psulim, do they passel the woman to marry a kohen? let's say the husband were to die afterwards, so she's only an almana, can she marry a kohen? Now a divorcee cannot, and not only can a divorcee not, but there's a concept of a reach haget, the smell of a get. That is, there's appearances as if there was a get here. There was some relationship to a get that passes for kahuna as well. So you have a machlokes here between a number of Amoraim. The Gemara first brings Rav, who says all of them pass for kahuna except the first one. The first one was not a get at all; it was just a practice document, and then that's given to her. It won't pass her for kahuna. Shmuel says all of them pass for kahuna, even the first one, and the reason is because any time Chazal use the word puzzle, you can't use it. It is a get, but it's puzzle, but it's significant enough that it puzzles her for kahuna. Of course, if he gives her a newspaper, so that's not a get. We wouldn't say that's a get puzzle. We would say that wasn't a get. Anytime we say it's a get, but it's puzzle, then it puzzles her for kahuna. Now, Shmuel says a similar halacha. Elsewhere, Shmuel says he says any time that there's a lashon puzzle, it puzzle. Same thing applies to a chalitza psula. A chalutza, a woman who had chalitza to free her from yibum, is also not allowed to marry a kohen. A chalitza psula also puzzles her from the other brothers. She cannot marry do yibum to any other brother. A chalutza cannot marry any of the other brothers. Now, on that, the Gemara mentions that Rav Elazar argues this is not all chalitzas psul is possible for the other brothers, only two. If the chalitza is performed with the left foot, that is puzzle and puzzles. If it's performed at night, it's also puzzle and it puzzles. However, if a child does chalitza, or if you use a sock instead of a shoe, that puzzles so much that it does not puzzle. It's such a puzzle chalitza that it doesn't puzzle for the other brothers. Now, back to the discussion of which of these gittin puzzle her to kahuna. Ziri says none of them do except the last one, and that's because the Chumrah will say yesh breira. Rav Asi also holds that way. Rav Yochanan says none of them puzzle at all. That means, practically speaking, that Rav Yochanan is holding that we don't say that there is breira. Therefore, the get is puzzle completely, so puzzle indeed that it's not shaykh. It's completely meaningless because it's not written lishma, and there's no meaning to the fact that he says whichever one I intend to give the get to, that's the one you're writing for now, because that's meaningless because it's not written for anyone specifically. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan elsewhere holds of the concept of ein breira. He does not hold of breira in other circumstances as well. And the Gemara brings an example of that, and that's two brothers that are dividing a property that they inherited from their father. So there's two ways to look at it. They're going to split the property. Each one will get a chelik. Do you view that at the time of the death of the father, each one inherited the part which he was in the future going to get? And that would be breira, that says that although they didn't know which piece was going to go to whom at the time they divided it, it turns out that he was inheriting the one that he found out later he actually received? Or do you say that they both inherited it together, and then they each sold half of each piece to the other? That means Reuven sold half of his to Shimon in exchange for half of Shimon's, and they each therefore own their own part of the entire property completely without any sharing. So the nafkamina would be if when Yovel comes to, they have to return it to each other. If you say the second way, then they bought each one's chelik from each other, and they bought at least partial ownership of each one's chelik from each other, and therefore they should have to return at the time of Yovel. Now Rabbi Yochanan says that they are considered to be brothers that bought from each other, and therefore it's Yovel, that Yovel they have to return it, and this of course implies that there is no breira. They each inherited it completely. So where it says, so if Rabbi Yochanan said that there, why does he have to say it here? If he said it here, why does he have to say it there? Why does he have to say the halach of ein breira twice? So Gemara says you need to have ein breira said separately in each of these, because over here you may think that the problem is not that there's ein breira in the case of the get, where he says whichever one leaves, whichever one I decide to give it to, we may say that that's only a lishma halacha, that does not count as lishma. But over there, in the case of the sale, the Torah said that anything which is sold has to be returned at Yovel, but a Yerusha or an inheritance or a gift does not have to be returned at Yovel, and therefore this is considered to be an inheritance, meaning that Rav Yochanan would be saying that this is a special halacha in Lishma, but maybe it's not true there, and he would say that you don't have to return it at Yovel. Therefore you have to tell me a special halacha that it has to be returned at Yovel. Now if it would only say it there, maybe it's only there because it's a chumrah to return it at Yovel. How do we know to say here l'kula that if he gives the get, they're not divorced. And therefore you have to tell me, even in Kula, if he gives the get, it's not divorced, and even if he gives the get, there is no psul to kahuna.